likely because of, where this town is, just a few miles or 60 miles from the Mexico border, a town that has dealt with immigration issues. We don't know the motive here, but the governor making a point that the suspect is a U.S. citizen or was a U.S. citizen.
So let's go back to how we believe this started, which is the killing of his grandmother. That becomes relevant in my view because if you think about Adam Lanza, Hook, he killed his mother before he went to the school, which sort of tells you he really wants to annihilate anyone that was an issue in his life. Now, you would ask, why is this elementary school an issue? My guess is going to be it's not the school itself, it's not individual students, obviously, or teachers, but it's what it represents in his head. And he knew that in the short term, he could do anything he wanted inside that school. And so, that's going to be some of the focus of this investigation is, what was the precipitating event, etc. All of those things extremely important, but, we can't miss the bigger picture, as I mentioned earlier, that, stopping these guys is really the issue. And there's no easy way to do that. And it really does boil down, as John Cohen said, you can certainly monitor social media the best you can, but that has its real limitations because of the number of people that are online. The key really is getting communities to tell you what's going on. I guarantee you there is information about this 18-year-old, whether it's at the high school or other kids that he associated with, or maybe even the teachers have picked up bits and pieces of information. But there's a thing called leakage where people spew out information that becomes very telling once you go back and look at a case. And they're going to be, attempting to collect that. But we could sadly have this conversation every day. I don't even like saying that, but that's kind of where we are with firearms availability and the anger and rage that's going on in this country. It really doesn't help when you get into subjects like immigration, minorities, people of color. I mean, we keep having them. We don't know if any of those play into the shooting, let me be clear. But the anger and rage in these arenas and people angry at other ethnicities or skin tone or whatever it might be, it's at a fever pitch. And so that actually adds, in my view, to increased shootings. That's a tough thing to get your arms around as far as doing anything in the short term to lower the temperature.
And Elizabeth Newman, again, former DHS official, we have heard of all types of motives. I know there are profiles that Brad mentions here, and we've seen, like in the Buffalo case, where there were red flags, where he was on the radar of law enforcement, and then we hear of incidents where the suspect was not on the radar of law enforcement. So essentially, we know that mass shootings have prevented by law enforcement, but they don't make the headlines. These incidents do. But if we compare these other incidents, what happened in Buffalo, to this one, they appear at this point, as we wait to even learn more about the shooter and was he on the radar of law enforcement. I mean, some would ask, is there anything that can be done to raise enough red flags to stop an incident like this from happening?
So I agree with John. John and I both worked at the Department of Homeland Security on prevention, non-law enforcement prevention. And the social science, the psychologists, mental health professionals have developed signs and indicators of risk factors of somebody that goes on to carry out an attack. The Secret Service has done research on this. The FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit has done research on this. And we've taken that research, other academic research, and we've figured out how to train a community on what those indicators are. And what is lacking is both deploying that training widespread. In other countries, there are other places where they're doing this much better than we are. We have not brought that community awareness to scale. And then we need a safe referral mechanism for people to call if they feel uncomfortable calling law enforcement. We need to strengthen our mental health profession, not because terrorists are necessarily, or attackers are necessarily mentally ill. In fact, the data tells us in most cases they're no more mentally ill than the general population. But mental health professions can help those at-risk individuals choose a healthier path to deal with that underlying grievance, that underlying psychosocial factor that's driving them towards the ideology or the idea that violence might be the solution for what they're so upset about. If we can equip and strengthen our mental health providers in this country to be able to help those individuals at risk of violence, we can start to reduce these attacks. But what I just described, as Brad mentioned, this is not a short-term solution. This will take 5-10 years, and we started this process maybe 5 years ago. It is really, really nascent, and we need to rapidly scale. That requires increasing funding, and that requires state governors and local mayors taking ownership of this concept of prevention, because it can't get run out of Washington, D.C. This is inherently about communities coming together and taking ownership of making sure that their communities are safe. Again, this is next generation see something, say something. This is not about having more law enforcement intervention, but rather training people to understand if you see certain signs and indicators in a loved one or in a colleague, ask how they're doing and get them help if you think they're not doing okay. Getting them help may actually end up saving lives. And we have got to be having a more frank conversation about this. This can't be all on law enforcement. There's too much of it. There are too many people that are struggling, especially after COVID, especially after the polarized conversations we were having in this country. We need to be engaging with people in civil discourse and getting people help if they're not doing well, and taking some of this off of law enforcement who are stretched too thin at this point.
Well said. And Elizabeth, you said it takes time, but John Cohen, as this country tries to get its act together, and it takes time, in the meantime, our children are dying, our elders are dying in grocery stores, our children in the halls of schools, and here we have another mass shooting in a school with double-digit numbers.
That's right, and as Brad said, we will likely, based on the current threat environment, be having the same discussion within the next few weeks. It's, on the same weekend that we had the shooting in Buffalo, we had mass shootings in other cities in the country as well. So what are some things we can be doing now? One, communities across the country, as Elizabeth indicated, need to organize themselves. It's not so much was the person on the radar screen. The question we should be asking is the radar screen tuned the right way to pick up on an individual who may be in the community, who may be traveling down the path to violence? I think that there's a lot of work that can be done in that area, and whether it's an educator, a coworker, a student, a family member, or somebody who's seeing something online, we need to make sure people understand what are the warning signs. And then communities across the country have to take stock of what resources they have and what they can do to prevent an act of violence. I will say one other thing, and Brad said something that I totally agree with. We are an angry country, and in some cases, it's anger that's very individualized, and that can at times manifest itself in an individual using violence as a way to express that anger. But it's an anger. It's a flame of anger that's being fanned sometimes by our public discourse. And something that we could do immediately is to have our public figures, whether they be in government or in the media or in other parts of our society, work to reduce the temperature of the anger that's way too prevalent in our society. Because our adversaries, they look at the societal fractures, whether it's on issues, as Brad said, on abortion or immigration or race or the election or the integrity of our election system, and they will leverage those fractures in our society, seek to exacerbate them by promoting content that's intended to fan the flames of the anger in our society. So a big place, a place where we take steps immediately is for public officials to take a step back, take a breath, and try to calm the temperature a bit.
Yeah, we all have to take a breath right now because at this hour we have 15 innocent lives taken, dead in the state of Texas, 14 of them children from Uvalde Elementary School. John, thank you. A big thanks to Elizabeth, Brad, and our whole entire ABC News team. We are continuing to monitor this breaking news story out of Uvalde, Texas, a mass shooting there at an elementary school. We'll have complete coverage throughout the evening here on ABC News Live, including on Prime with our Lindsay Davis. I'm Kenneth Moten. Again, we'll keep you updated on this story as it develops.
About what this person or of those details to come out. Again, that press conference is now going to happen at 5 o'clock. We'll bring it to you. The latest, whenever it does happen, is going to be moving from this civic center here just a few miles down the road to the Fairplex. About what this person or of those details to come out. Again, that press conference is now going to happen at 5 o'clock. We'll bring it to you. The latest, whenever it does happen, is going to be moving from this civic center here just a few miles down the road to the Fairplex. We'll be heading that way in just a few minutes.
Lee, Steve Springsteen and Myra Arthur taking over for the...